Welcome back to the reading of the book Chaos Storm by Torebetr. Please remember to like and subscribe to the channel to get notified when these videos drop. If you have suggestions or comments, please leave them in the comments below. Let's get to it. Chapter 1. Scorn. 16 years later. "Guess what, Mother? It's my name day," Art whispered in the darkness. He cradled his ring. It was the only thing he had left from his parents. "I'm 16 now, Father. I'm old enough to do anything I want." He sat, resting his back against a defensive obelisk that stood at the furthest edge of the southern corner of the city. He sat with the radiant lights of the city and the pyramid behind him, and the desert stretched for leagues ahead with nothing in sight. "What do you mean I'm not old enough yet?" "I told you it's my name day. The administrator said I can marry now," Art said and paused in silence. He waited, as if someone might respond to his banter, but no one did. No one ever did. He placed the ring on his finger and rested his head against the warm stone. As he sat, a man walked by, half naked and looking starved. His skin was white and pale. Art ran his hand through his long, unruly black hair and watched the man stop at the edge of the desert. Fair skin and Scorn, Art mused. Almost all the citizens of the south corner had bronze skin like Art or darker. The man did not seem to notice Art as he looked out into the desert. "I wonder if he's going to do it," Art thought. The pale man wore a tattered scavenger's uniform like the one Art wore. The only difference was the sleeves. Despite the hot weather, Art was the only person to insist on wearing a fully sleeved shirt. Although he hated it, he had to. He had something to hide. Conscious of the fact that he was no longer alone, Art adjusted his shirt and sleeves, making sure his tattoos are hidden. He had a tattoo that he always kept hidden under his shirt, a red triangle that resembled a pyramid on his back near his left shoulder. He also had what was called a roamer, a tattoo that moved. It took the shape of a golden red phoenix. It constantly moved around his back, near his shoulders, and sometimes it would travel to his arms or chest. These roamers were unique and outrageously expensive. Only the richest of the rich had them. And me, a very poor boy in Scorn. I wonder, when did people start calling it Scorn? Was it always this terrible? Or was there a day when life was actually nice in this place? Life in Scorn was hard. Living so close to the desert, so far away from the pyramid. The pyramid was the heart of the city. In fact, the entire city of Anaran was built around the pyramid. The closer you are to the pyramid, the richer and safer you are. The further you are from the pyramid, the more likely you will die young, he thought with a grimace. Art's stomach growled. Gods, I'm hungry. He hadn't eaten since the early morning. The pale man heard the sound and turned to Art. His eyes were full of tears. "I have to do it," the man said. "I can't go on like this." "You don't have to do anything, friend. Come back, and I'm sure we can fix whatever trouble you're in," Art said. "Trouble? I'm not in trouble. I'm just tired," he said and dropped his back to the ground, then stepped out into the desert. "Wait! Come back!" Art called out, but the man did not respond. He walked until he was swallowed by darkness. Tears stung in Art's chestnut-colored eyes. "Pull yourself together, Art. This is not the first time you have seen someone do this." Every few days, someone walked out into the desert, never to be seen again. Art hated that. He would not become like them. Even if he lost everything, he would never walk to his death willingly. Can I blame him? Living in Scorn isn't exactly easy. The city had 4 corners, and Scorn was the worst of them. All chaos storms came from the south. That was the one rule that people understood about chaos storms. They could not be predicted, they could not be calculated, but they always came from the south. They always hit Scorn first. A cloud moved in the sky above and revealed a bright star, the star of Anwar. Art hesitated for a moment, then lowered his head and began to pray. He prayed to Alyana, the Lady of Light. He prayed for his parents to return. He prayed for a long time until he fell asleep. In his dreams, he saw an empty desert plain and a single rock. On the rock sat a man and a woman. They held each other. Art stepped closer. "Mother?" he asked. The woman turned to look at him. Art woke up startled. He did not see her face. He felt a pang of pain in his chest, a renewed sense of loss. It took him a moment to realize someone was calling. He turned to see Zeno and Lulu looking down at him. The orphan twins wore tattered rags and ridiculously large white hats. "What is that you're wearing?" Art asked. Lulu looked up at the hat that covered the upper half of her face. She gave Art a sheepish smile. "You like it? They were giving it out at the temple. I have one to spare back home if you want." Art laughed. Despite his previous mood, Lulu's innocence always made him happy. "No, Lulu, I don't like hats, but thanks," Art said. He looked at them again. They could not be older than 12, despite their claims that they were both 15 years old. "Where are you guys going anyway? Isn't it late for you two to be hanging around the desert?" Art asked. Zeno furrowed his brow and said, "If it's not late for you, it's not late for us." Art was about to object when Zeno continued, "We're out of food. Garth wouldn't give us any money in advance, so we came out here to collect some stones." Art was shocked. "Now? There hasn't been a storm in weeks. Any stone worth gathering would be too far away for you two to find. And to do it this late is madness," Art said. Lulu approached and tugged on Art's shirt. "You can help us, Art. You always seem to find the best stones. You will help us, right?" Art felt pity for the twins. He gazed out into the desert. He was sure there was nothing out there for leagues. He could not sense any stones out there. He could sense their presence, which was a gift of his he shared with no one. He had always been able to accurately locate chaos stones and predict when the next storm would hit, and even how long it would last. He couldn't tell why he had that gift, but he was most grateful for it. He felt his phoenix move around and climb to the lower end of his neck. He took a deep breath and said, "A storm is coming maybe in a day or two. Let us go back now and we can go gathering together then." Zeno shook his head stubbornly. "You can't predict storms. No one can, and I'm not going back empty-handed," he said, and stomped his foot on the ground in a gesture that might have been to convey resolve but came off as childish. With a hint of tears in Zeno's eyes, he said, "Lulu's hungry. I'm not going back without something to eat." Art felt sorry for them. A storm is coming soon. He felt it deep in his bones, but he wasn't ready to explain that to them. He sighed. "Grandpa Walter's not gonna like this." He opened his bag and dropped half his stones to the ground. "Here, take these. Trade them with Garth. They should keep you fed for a few days." He looked to the horizon and said, "When the next storm comes, we can go gathering together." Lulu hugged Art. She was short and could only reach his waist, but she held tight. Zena turned and whispered, "You're a good friend, Art." Art walked over to the abandoned bag left behind by the stranger. Empty as expected. Still, it was a perfectly good bag. You don't throw away things in Scorn. They packed up the stones and together they walked back into Scorn. Walking their back to the desert, the pyramid dominated their view. It was a marvelous sight. The pyramid was the largest structure in the city. It was made of a beautiful white stone, and as usual, the apex was shining with a bright light that lit the sky as if it was a second moon. The light cascaded down to the four corners of the pyramid, making the edges look like blades of light. Art had always dreamed of exploring the pyramid's holes. What would it be like to be inside that apex? "Have you ever been inside?" Art asked. Lulu nodded and said, "Once, when the shield failed a few years ago, they took us to Stormhold and gave us food." "That settles it. They can't be more than 12, Art thought, smiling. The shield failed only twice in his lifetime. The latest was 5 years ago, and a particularly nasty storm lasted for over 3 days. The other time was when he was 4 years old. If they only been inside once, then they are no older than 12. He barely remembered his first time. The rich and powerful lived in the district right next to the pyramid. Some buildings almost leaned on it. They were the oldest families. They could trace their bloodlines back to the construction of the pyramid, whenever that was. The Inner Circle was the arrogant name they called their district. It looked beautiful from afar, full of lights and bright colors, towers and mansions. It also housed the temples of the 7 gods. "Look, see how fast it flies?" Lulu said, pointing at a shining light that zipped around the sky and turned north, disappearing around the pyramid. "Must be one of those flying carts," said Zeno. "Arrogant bastards with their fancy toys." Art didn't like the inner circle. It looked glamorous and clean, but compared to the pyramid, it seemed like a poor imitation. A small, tiny light that did its best to outshine the sun, but failed. They reached the center square of Scorn and headed directly to Garth's shop. The buildings in Scorn were old, dirty, and unadorned. If it weren't for the pyramid's light on a moonless night such as this, the place would be pitch black. Art knocked and called out, "Hey Garth, open up!" Nothing happened. Art knocked again, shouting this time, "Come on, Garth, we have stones for you." A thick voice shouted back, "Go away." The twins retreated a few steps. Art laughed. "Open up, you greasy fat bastard!" A crashing sound startled Art, followed closely by the sound of many things falling and rolling on the floor. Garth opened the door so hard it hit the opposite wall like a cannon. Garth was a man so large that no one could see his entire body through the door frame. He looked down and saw Art and the twins who were now hiding behind Art. "What did you call me, boy?" he grumbled. "A greasy fat bastard," Art said with no hint of fear. Garth leaned in until he was face to face with Art, then smiled. He had a dirty, bald head, and his crooked teeth were stained green from years of smoking green mist. His breath smelled like a tomb. "You are insolent, boy. Insolent and stupid. I could kill you right here and no one would care," Garth said, smiling. Art crossed his arms and said, "Stupid, huh? How about this? I'll give you all my stones for free if you can tell me what insolent means." Garth stared at him for a moment, then threw his head back and roared with laughter. Art smiled and handed him the stones. The twins did the same. "So few? You woke me up for this?" Garth said, frowning. "It's what's left, Garth. There hasn't been a storm in weeks." The huge man collected the stones and went inside his dark room. The stench of green mist was nauseating. Garth came back and handed them 2 slips of paper. Each was signed and stamped. It read, 2.5 credits. Art read it in disbelief and asked, "What? Only 5 credits? That's cheating, Garth, and you know it." Garth said, "The rates have changed, and you only brought a handful of stones." Art felt the blood rush to his head, his ears suddenly hot. "Give us back the stones and we will take our business elsewhere," Art said. Garth shook his head. "The trade is made and the slips have been stamped." He leaned forward again and smiled wide. "Who's stupid now, boy?" He did not wait for a response. He went back inside and slammed the door shut. Art was fuming. Lulu grabbed his hand and asked, "Do we get to eat now?" Disappointed, he nodded and said, "Yes, for a couple of days at least." He handed Zena one of the payment slips. "You can trade that at Carl's for a few rations," Art said, exasperated. Zeno took the slip and thanked Art. Then he took Lulu's hand and walked away. Lulu waved goodbye, and Art smiled at her. Walking home, he thought about the twins and how bad their life was. A flying cart zipped above him, its occupants laughing and singing. Greedy bastards. He watched them fly towards the desert and thought how easy his job would be if he had one of these. He entered a side street and walked straight to his house. Calling it a house stretched the meaning of the word, really. It was more like a hovel. A 1-story building that was made of 3 tiny rooms. He tapped on the door, then entered. The door opened into the first and largest room. It was a living room where they sat, cooked, and ate. Titania sat on a chair humming to herself and knitting something. She greeted him with a warm smile. "Hey," Art said, leaned in and kissed her gently on the forehead. She was thin and sickly, with fading red hair and kind green eyes. They chatted for a while about the day. Titania got up to prepare dinner. She moved around efficiently, navigating the narrow spaces of the room, and cooked their dinner. Dinner was simple. The same meal they had had 1,000,000 times. Energy soup, a single potato, and a slice of meat the size of 2 fingers. The soup was a vital part. It contained everything the body needed, or so the admin said. Art received his bowl of soup with a sigh. Energy soup for dinner, and more for breakfast and for lunch. Of course, more soup. The door opened, and Walter entered. A tall, large man. He had to crouch to pass through the door. He was well built for a man in his 60s, and had an impressive blonde beard. He dropped his bag next to Art's and flopped onto his chair. What a day. I swear these idiots at the Smith shop are gonna kill me. Why? Art asked as he slurped his soup. Dreams of riches, my boy. They keep trying to invent something that would please the spoiled brats up in the inner circle, Walter said, shaking his head. What's wrong with that? Art asked. What's wrong with having dreams of a better life? Nothing is wrong, as long as you work for it. These idiots just want the quick riches. They don't want to work hard and save up, he said and gave Art a side glance. Art noticed and chose to ignore it. He wasn't in the mood for an argument, especially this old argument. Did you trade in your findings today? Walter asked. Yes. Art handed him the slip, bracing himself for what was surely to follow. Walter stopped eating and dropped his spoon. That's it? You wasted an entire day for 2.5 lousy credits? Red-faced, Art sighed. I had to give Zeno and Lulu half my stones. They were starving. Titana smiled and patted him on the back. Oh, Art, that is very nice of you. Walter looked down and shook his head slowly. It is nice and noble. Art, but it's not enough. Do you want to be a scavenger for the rest of your life? Silence. Art did not know what to say. I did what I thought was right. Tomorrow, I want you to come with me to the Smith shop. I can get you a job, Walter was saying before he was interrupted by the scraping of Art's chair as he got to his feet. I told you before, I don't want to work at the Smith shop, Art said. Why? It's a decent paying job, and you can learn a lot there, Walter said. I don't want it. I don't like it. It's better than wandering around the desert looking for rocks in the sand like beggars. Better than dealing with addicts come like Garth. It's better. Beggars? Art shouted, tempers flaring. I make more money in a week than you make in a month. Art! Gasped Titana. Everyone fell silent. Art was shaking with rage. Walter stood up, looked at Art, and said, I make so little money because I'm too old and I can't see straight. All I can do is move stuff around and break things. He left the table and went to his room. At the door he stopped and said, That job raised you and fed you. Now I'm old and nearly blind. What's your excuse? With that, he entered his room. Titana shook her head and followed him inside, leaving Art alone with a deep sense of shame. He shuffled back to his room and threw his back to the ground, then fell into his bed. His fingers toyed with the ring as he tried to suppress his tears. There in the dark, alone in his tiny room, Art wondered to himself, would Mother and Father be ashamed of me? So that was it for this chapter. I hope you enjoyed it. I was trying to play around with voices a little bit. I don't know if I was very successful or not. Garth was definitely very funny and difficult to achieve. This was a fun little chapter to write. The function of it was basically introduction, to introduce you to the protagonist Art and his family, the world he lives in, and poverty and classes and stuff like that. I think it's perfectly functional. It provides what needs to be provided for the reader to understand where the story is coming from. So I've enjoyed reading this chapter to you. If you've enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe to the channel so you can get notified when the next video drops. If you have suggestions or anything that you would like to see me do in these videos, please leave a comment. I promise you I read every comment and I reply when I can. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.